Welcome to Aquarian Diary, where we discuss issues around the emerging age of Aquarius. I'm your host, John Irving. Thank you for joining me. Greetings all. It's November 4th, 2022. Before I get into the subject I want to talk about here, let me set the stage. There's no doubt that anyone paying attention to what's happening in this psychic/spiritual community will recognize that there has just been a tremendous upsurge in people using psychic and intuitive gifts and abilities, and they're talking about everything from spirituality to politics. Clearly, this is undeniable. Now, this has happened before. It has come and gone in different waves at different times. In the West, there have been other periods where psychic or paranormal activity came to the fore. In the late 19th century, there was the spiritualism movement. Many may be aware of the Theosophical Society, Alice Bailey and the Blue Books. In the 1960s, it came to the fore again during the countercultural movement. In the 1980s, the New Age movement was a significant phenomenon. And of course, once again, we are going through another revival of interest in these types of topics. There's also another element of this, because it seems to me that it can be a bit of a gateway for some people to get into and learn more about spirituality. Fantastic. Assuming you're dealing with reputable people. That's great. But there is this question that nobody seems to really address about what the actual link is between psychic phenomenon and spirituality. And that's what I want to talk about here. It's a fascinating subject. Personally, I think it's an expression of the shift into the age of Aquarius. So let's consider this question. Are people who have strong psychic abilities more spiritually advanced than average people? In short, no, not necessarily. How do I know this? My first significant encounters with the psychic community were in the mid-1980s. During that time, I was publishing a regional New Age magazine, so I got to interact with a lot of really interesting people who were affiliated in some way with the spiritual community. And part of my circle at that time was the psychic community, and I spent a fair amount of time with quite a few of them, some of whom had very powerful psychic abilities, and always had since they were children. And some of them appeared to be no different from average people in many ways. They simply had these abilities that were enhanced. That is not to judge them. Some of them were really lovely people, some of whom are no longer here, and I miss them. One in particular was a really lovely lady, very kind lady. She was wonderful. But they were no more or less spiritually advanced than you would find amongst the general population. Some were and some weren't. And in the intervening years, I have known many, many people with powerful abilities. Some who exhibited abilities that would surprise even people who are familiar with these phenomena. But the same was true with them. There is just as much ego present as you would find amongst most people. So there doesn't seem to be a correlation directly between psychic abilities and your level of spiritual consciousness. I have come to think of it as psychic abilities being no different from any other abilities that we may have. Some people are super intelligent. Some people exhibit characteristics that make them stand out from everybody else in some way. And I think that's how it works. Having said that, I will say this. Most people who I have met or encountered who do appear to be more highly evolved or appear to be very highly evolved are much more likely to have psychic abilities. So psychic gifts seem to be part of the evolutionary process. When we evolve our consciousness, they come to us naturally. I have had telepathic exchanges, very clear telepathic communications with people who seem to be further along in their spiritual development. So it does seem to be a side effect. However, I think some people are just born with strong psychic abilities, and it doesn't necessarily mean they are highly spiritually advanced. Based on my experience, like I said, I have met people who have significant psychic abilities who didn't appear to be very different from the general population with respect to their overall consciousness. In fact, there have been cases in history where there have been people with psychic abilities who have misused those abilities. And I have personally known people over the years with such abilities who have done things that I consider to be very questionable, if not unethical. Not always, just sometimes. So like I said, we cannot necessarily conclude that because someone is psychic, that they are more highly evolved or advanced. It has been said that there are a very select few number of people who have a channeling soul contract. These would be the trance channelers who go into a deep state of trance, and their form is temporarily used by a very highly evolved being or very powerful being who uses the channel as a medium to communicate through. Typically, trance channels do not remember anything that they say while they are in a trance. It is not a very common type of psychic phenomenon. Apparently, those who have a soul contract to be a channel benefit greatly from this experience, which would make sense because they are channeling very high consciousness energy. However, some trance channels have to maintain a very clean lifestyle and work very hard to stay in a state which enables them to be an effective channel. And let's also be clear, everyone has gifts. It is simply a question of whether or not they are being employed or used. Although clearly some people demonstrate them very effectively and do so naturally. One more thing I will add is that one of my significant spiritual teachers advised us to not indulge in astral level matters too much. Because on the astral level, there are all kinds of beings who are not necessarily highly evolved. And when people are using their psychic abilities, they are often tapping into astral level entities and energies. This teacher wanted us to transcend that because it was such a mixed bag of consciousness. There are trickster spirits. There are all kinds of entities who do not exist in the physical. But just because they don't exist in the physical doesn't mean they are highly evolved. There are many non-incarnate beings who are not highly evolved at all. The astral level is where we would find, for example, deceased people who have not crossed over. We are all disincarnate at some point, and some of us here right now are wonderful people, but there's also people who act very badly. and they will be disincarnate at some point too. So you do have to be careful. If you're working with your guides and you're following good energetic hygiene practices, you're probably fine. It's just something to be aware of. And this is another point I just know from past experience, that you do have to be discriminating, always. This is a vast topic, and it is not my intent to go into a lot of detail here. I just really wanted to focus on the question of whether or not someone with psychic gifts is necessarily more spiritually evolved than someone who doesn't have psychic gifts. So I really have to be careful not to go down this rabbit hole too far here now. I don't think I need to say much more about it. It's pretty clear to me, based on decades of personal experience, that what I'm saying is accurate. Of course, this is my opinion, so it's up to each person to determine questions like this for themselves. But I think this is a fascinating question, and one that many people probably have wondered about. Thanks for your support. It's helpful to me if you subscribe, like, and share this video if you find it useful. I'll put links in the episode description that are relevant. All the best. Take care. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.